Hello again, everyone. Thank you for joining me on my channel. My name is Ursulon Cockrell. As promised in the last video, big changes now. This is no longer by End Times Bible Hope. This name of this channel is now It Is Finished Ministries. And that is to really showcase that Jesus came to fulfill all things. And so that will be the focus of our study. One of the things in this video you're going to hear about, we're going to study the Exodus in a way that you've never heard before. We often think of the Exodus as coming out of sin, but what the Bible is illustrating is something really quite different. For example, in the life of Moses, Moses tells us in the book of Deuteronomy 18 that God would raise up for them a prophet like unto himself. That is significant because Jesus was that prophet. He was going to bring the church out of spiritual Egypt, as we will see. We find in 1 Corinthians 10:11, Paul tells us that all these things happened to them, Israel, for ensamples, meaning types, and they are written for our admonition, upon whom the ends of the world are come. And that word there, worlds, means ends of the ages. So this is a first century. Paul is saying the ends of the ages have come upon us. Not us here in the 21st century, upon Paul and that first century generation of people. We find in Matthew chapter 2, Matthew, as Herod is initiating the killing of all the children, Matthew says something significant. He's referencing an Old Testament verse. He says that it might be fulfilled, out of Egypt have I called my son. Now that is significant because what's taking place here? Herod is killing the children, just as Pharaoh, when Moses was born, tried to eradicate Moses. So we see this parallel here. Now, what is Matthew really talking about? He's not referring to when Jesus fled to Egypt. He's referring to Jesus fleeing out of Israel to escape Herod. Now, Herod in this application, he serves as a type of Pharaoh, because as in Egypt, Pharaoh tried to kill the children. So here we see Herod trying to kill the children as also. So he is telling us that Israel had become a spiritual type of Egypt. And we also see this in Revelation chapter 11, when the two witnesses lie in the spiritual city called Sodom and Egypt. Now, if you remember back in the Old Testament, Deuteronomy 32 and multiple other places, Israel as referred to as having the vine of Sodom. They are here also being referred to as spiritual Egypt. They had become the enemies of God. And it also tells us in that verse that this is where our Lord was crucified. So we know that is Jerusalem. Now let's examine the parallels between the Exodus out of Egypt, and then the Exodus out of spiritual Egypt in Jesus' time. In the historical event, Moses, there was the Passover event, and they had to flee immediately. Now, the very next day, they were told to bake unleavened bread because they had to flee so quickly. The following day, they had reached the Red Sea, and this is where they went through the Red Sea, and they appeared on the other side. Now, let's look at the life of Christ. In the life of Christ, he was the Passover lamb. He was the lamb that was sacrificed for us. The very next day, which was the Feast of Unleavened Bread, he rested in the tomb. On the third day, he was fulfilling the Feast of First Fruits. And Paul tells us in Romans 6, verse 3, so many of us were baptized into Jesus Christ, were baptized into his death. Also in 1 Corinthians 10, verse 11, when Paul is drawing out the similarities of this typological experience, he tells us that all went through the sea, all were baptized into Moses. So we see this parallelism here, where going through the Red Sea, they had died into Moses, they were baptized into Moses, and upon exiting the water, they had experienced a type of resurrection. We see that in the life of Jesus. We were baptized into his death, and we, in a sense, were raised with him out of the grave. That's what baptism signifies. Now, okay, so this took place, Jesus died around the year 31 AD. Now, in the life of Moses, when they exited the Red Sea, they spent approximately 40 years in the wilderness before they crossed over into the Promised Land. Now, let's zoom out and take a big picture here. In the life of Christ, after his death, there was also a 40-year period, which brings us up to 70 AD. So are you seeing the parallelism here? In Jericho, there was a harlot named Rahab. She had to come out of this city. Now, that's very significant, because we see the same thing in Revelation chapter 18. A woman, right, is called out, come out of her, my people. So we see that this Jericho is actually foreshadowing 70 AD. Jericho, the enemies of God, had now become, in 70 AD, Israel had now become those enemies of God. So we're seeing this chronology here, this perfect typology of sequence of events where Moses had drawn the people of Israel out of Egypt. Now Christ here is drawing them out of Egypt and crossing into the promised land. That must mean that the destruction in 70 AD is a type of the promised land, when the New Testament church would be victorious over what had become the enemy of God, Israel. Now there's something else very significant in the destruction of Jericho. We find that on the very first day, as they're told to go around the city, it tells us in verse 4 that the 7 priests should bear 7 trumpets of ram's horns, and the 7th day you shall compass the city 7 times, and the priests shall blow with the trumpets. So here they are encircling the city 7 days, once each day for the first 6 days, and on the 7th day they're supposed to go around 7 times. Now, keep in mind the 7 trumpets in Revelation. What we're going to see on the very first day, Joshua actually tells the people, you shall not shout. This is in verse 10. Nor make any noise with your voice, neither shall any word proceedeth out of your mouth until the day I bid you shout. Then shall you shout. So here they are in chapter 6, verse 10. Joshua tells them, don't make a peep. Don't make any sounds. This is at the opening of the first trumpet in that march around the city. Now, on the last day, when they finally march around the city, Joshua tells them in verse 20, the people shouted with a great shout. So we see here, they're told to be silent. On the last day, when the city is falling, the walls fall, they make a great shout. We see the same thing in Revelation regarding the 7 trumpets. At the opening to the 7 trumpets in Revelation chapter 8, with the 7th seal being open, it says, there was silence in heaven about the space of half an hour. Revelation chapter 8, verse 1. Now, at the conclusion of the 7 trumpets in Revelation chapter 11, we find a similar experience, that the people, there were great voices in heaven. In Revelation chapter 11, verse 15, it says, the 7th angel sounded. There were great voices in heaven saying, the kingdoms of this world are become the kingdoms of our Lord. And so we see here that destruction of Jericho, the encircling of the city, was the Feast of Trumpets, the blowing of trumpets, announcing the day of judgment to come upon the city, Jericho in this instance. In the book of Revelation, we see the synonymous parallel here, where the 7 trumpets are the Feast of Trumpets. They are announcing the day of judgment upon, again, keep this in mind because this is very critical, Israel. Israel had become the enemies of God. We're looking at a sequence of events in the life of Moses, exiting Egypt, and then crossing into the promised land. The church, synonymously, Christ is leading them out of spiritual Egypt, where they spend 40 years in the wilderness to cross over into the promised land through the destruction of the enemies of God who had become Israel. Again, the typology is critical here because it's showing us that the 7 trumpets in Revelation have a first century fulfillment, and it is announcing the day of judgment upon literal Israel, and that judgment fell. Today, we now tabernacle with God. I know this is something foreign, but we read about in Ephesians, chapter 2, that we are built upon the chief cornerstone, Jesus, a building fitly framed together that grows, don't miss this, into a holy temple for the habitation of God through the Spirit. In Revelation chapter 7, we are told that the priests serve him day and night in his temple. We are those priests. We serve him day and night in the spiritual temple built upon the chief cornerstone, Jesus. If you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, share. Please subscribe. Look forward to sharing more exciting videos with you. Thank you, and God bless.